Listener discretion advised.
If you've been affected by the rampant opioid epidemic, as we have, then this podcast is for you. We want to bring hope to those suffering from heroin addiction and shed light on its darkness. Let's share an environment where we can discuss all aspects of heroin addiction without shame or judgment. Our mission is to educate the community about heroin and its deadly sidekick, fentanyl. How easy it is to get, how easy it is to become addicted, the latest treatments, and its newest targets. JCF is a nonprofit organization created to honor the life of Jeremy Castro, who passed away from a fentanyl overdose in 2017. Now, my family and I are doing our part to combat this opioid epidemic. I'm Rebecca Castro. I lost my brother and many friends to heroin, and I made this show to demand eradication of this epidemic. Let's do this.
So today we have with us Chief Shaman Steve Hupp of Ayaquest Native America's Church in Kentucky. And welcome to our show, Steve.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad you invited me here, Rose.
Yes, I am very happy to get to know you. And I have a few questions for you. We know that ayahuasca is now being used to help treat drug addiction, and we're going to cover that later in our show. But can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. I was born in 1965. I'm presently 54 years old. I joined the military, kind of court nudged, if you will. The day I turned 17, I was in the Army. Long story short, on my military career, it lasted probably about 3.5 years, and then I was chaptered out of the military because I was involved in a drug cartel in Europe. So I was escorted off the continent of Europe at gunpoint, and at that time I was 20 years old when I came back stateside. The military chaptered me out under what's called a Chapter 13, a general discharge under honorable conditions. From that point on, I kind of started businesses, bounced around, but to be honest, a lot of them were cover for what I was doing on the dark side of my life. At that time, I was pretty much in the criminal lifestyle. I hadn't fully embraced it. I had kids. My first wife, we were married for 18 years. My parents, I was born late in their life. My dad was born in 1918. Wow. If that tells you the range there. My nearest sibling was 16 years older than me. Yeah. So long story short, I kind of grew up with old world values. My dad, he took me hunting from the time I was 5 years old. It was what got him through the Great Depression, was being able to kill things and eat them. So for him, it was very important that I learn these things. But for real, my grocery stores were full. I really didn't need these skill sets at that time, but I did learn a lot by going through it, but I also felt that it gave me a very disassociative mindset. I'm not saying every hunter at 5 years old who's breaking rabbits' necks goes through that, but I did. Right. Anyway, long story short, moving ahead past the military, out of the Army, I opened my own business. Hurricane Andrew comes in. A lot of things change in my life there. Okay, I'm moving along. I'm trying to give you a brief overview till I get to what brought me in contact with the word ayahuasca. Okay. And that is, long story short, I got involved in robbing banks, stealing cars, and other things, but those were my mainstays.
Okay, so let me stop you there. So when you got into this line of work, were you married and did you have a family?
Yes, I did. I was married. I have 3 biological children. Okay. And so, at that time I was working as an over-the-road truck driver. My parents became elderly, and long story short, I had to come off the road. I had 3 little kids, and my dad was a decorated World War II vet, and his prescription bills at that time were like $5,000 a month. And he wasn't set up on his VA benefits. Looking back, that was something I should have explored, but I didn't. Right. I got angry, and I robbed my first bank to help pay for their prescription bills. Oh. Now then, that just got me started. To be honest, I didn't have to continue, but bank robbery's kind of like eating potato chips. You just can't stop at one.
Wow.
You know,
I was going to say,
gonna,
yeah, I mean, certainly, you had good intentions. Weren't you scared to death to rob your first bank, or did you just?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for the first 4 or 5 bank robberies, yeah, you are terrified. But then, something shifted for me. I started believing that I could continue to do it, and it was an illusion.
Right.
Because, the more you study any bank robber, it's 1 in a million that walks away into the sunset.
Right. And how old were you when you robbed your first bank?
Let's see here. I'd have to go back through the memory banks there because it was, I would have to say probably 29 and 30.
Okay.
When I robbed my first bank. Now, I was caught when I was 35.
Oh, so you did get away with it for a while, right?
Yes, I operated in approximately 6 different states. So yes, I got away with it for quite a while.
Okay.
Probably much longer than I should have.
Right.
And, that's what I also want everybody out there to understand. I'm not grandizing bank robbery. In my mind at that time, I sold it to myself that I wasn't harming anybody. I was just getting the money. It was insured. But the reality of it was, if you stepped between me and that door, I would have killed you.
Wow.
And that, and that was something I had to come to terms with through many ayahuasca journeys.
Right.
How was I ready to, kill women? How was I ready to do this? And how did I delude myself? And also drugs help fuel it. There was many things. I find that, from my own experience, if you're an addict, you're just, you may have your drug of choice, but you're taking anything that you can lay your hands on a lot of times.
Right.
Because a lot of times, your drug of choice isn't available, so you jump to next best. And at that time, my drug of choice was adrenaline. And I liked cocaine. And I liked women. And I was a womanizer. I was everything that, if I told the truth at that time during any psychiatric evaluation in prison, they would have labeled me a psychopath.
Wow. Okay, so moving on. So you did about 4 or 5 successfully, so to speak. And then what happened? You continued robbing banks?
No, I took on a partner because I had a vault picked out that I was going to do for about $7 million. It was going to be my last heist.
And was your father still alive at this time?
At this time, yes. My father and mother are both still alive, but my mother had suffered like 5 strokes, and she wasn't even really cognizant, if you will. She was out there.
So your family...
My father had 5 heart attacks at this time, 3 strokes.
Oh,
and
I'm sorry.
he was going down,
right.
and so all these things were playing into it, and bank robbery was a beautiful distraction to the life.
Right.
What life was becoming for me.
And nobody in your family had any idea you were robbing banks?
No, nobody had any idea. My wife at the time, she probably knew something was up because, I quit driving rig. But, I was coming and going like I was driving semi because, it takes time to go case a bank. All this takes time and you got to travel. So, she really didn't know, but she didn't ask a lot of questions either.
Right.
But that had been through most of our marriage.
Okay.
So it wasn't nothing unusual.
Right.
And so she really knew nothing. There was when my kids, I took my kids to court to let them watch me be sentenced because I wanted to make an impression on them.
Wow.
So long story short, my oldest son at the time was like 8 or 9 years old, and he recognized that I was at one of his little league baseball games 2 hours after I'd robbed the bank.
Oh my God.
And I was coaching it.
Wow. Okay. Whew. All right.
So you can see what a double life I was leading at that time.
Yes.
And,
okay.
And so, this is where I was. And there wasn't, if I tell this in many ceremonies, if I had to say what's the biggest change in my life today versus then is today I live a very fulfilling life.
Okay.
And then I lived a very adrenaline-fueled life.
Right.
And a lot of times it's easy to confuse the highs of adrenaline for being fulfilled.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So can you Yeah. So can you tell us what happened, how you got caught, or the first time
Yes,
you got
sure.
caught?
Yeah, the bank robbery that I got busted on, it was already over. I was using old man theatrical makeup when I entered. I took on my partner. He was watching through in a stolen ride through the drive-through, watching my back, and I was doing all the tellers. Long story short, bank robbery went perfect. It was in Brandenburg, Kentucky. It went perfect. He drove past. We already switched from the stolen ride to the clean ride, which was my ride. And he was driving past a sheriff who was sitting at a corner. We were miles away from the bank. The bank robbery was already 38 minutes old when he engaged. And long story short, I'm laying on the floor looking at the money, stripping off gear and all the above, and I look up at him, and his eyes are big around his saucer plates, and he's looking dead at the cop as he's driving by. I still had my scanner on, and so I hear in the earpiece, "Hey, I got a suspicious guy in a blue minivan."
Oh, boy.
And at that time, the cop flips and does a U-E in the middle of the road. Well, I'm yelling at my partner, drive, 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 because all he had to do was break line of sight, and I could jump out with everything. He never entered the bank.
Wow.
Long story short, he didn't do that. He pulls over, gets out, puts his hands up. Police open fire on me because I'm shifting from the back to the driver's door. And long story short, they open fire on me with a riot gun at 20 feet.
Wow.
And miss.
Did you get...
And miss.
Wow. Okay.
So this started a high-speed chase. I lean over. The second charge of buckshot goes over my head, tears up the dash. His third charge of buckshot hit the rear tire, but fortunately this was a front-wheel drive van. I was able to put it in gear and take off. But because he blew out the tire, the rim is cutting a line in the road, in the asphalt, and it's shooting sparks and rubber everywhere. So now they can follow me. I'm marked. So anyway, long story short, I'm near Fort Knox, Kentucky. I'm thinking about jumping into the military reservation, but I decided I didn't want to take on the U.S. Army.
Right.
So I make a right and go into just wooded area. Long story short, 3 dog teams later, 3 hours and 80 cops, I'm finally pinned down.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
They must have, did they just pummel you seriously when they found you?
It was an adrenaline-fueled moment. I had, they were screaming different commands at me. One was telling me to lay down or he was going to blow my head off. Another one was telling me if I move, he's going to blow my head off. I mean, they were really amped up. You're a 12-point buck. This is a bank robbery, shots fired, high-speed chase, everything you see in the movies. And not to mention, I broke 3 dog teams from the state police. And so these people were...
What does that mean?
That means they lost my scent.
Oh.
They could not find me.
Wow.
You see, when I was in the military, I was in a maintenance unit. Long story short, I'd get attached to different units, and one time I was attached to an MP unit on how to train dogs for drug detection, explosives, and tracking.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very well acquainted with how tracking dogs work.
Oh,
and they're easily defeated if you know how.
Right.
And and how you do it is very simple.
Well, we won't go into that. We won't go
into
that. But
that's fine. Anyway, so now back to this. Okay, finally get caught. Yes, adrenaline fueled. I don't blame them. This was a bank robbery. It was my choice. I was there. Yes, I got smacked around a little bit, but they treated me better than I would have treated them.
Yeah.
At that time. And I have to say that. And I have to say also that, even as a felon and all the above, and I know we're supposed to be against each other, the reality of it is after you've been caged with a lot of the pieces of shit they have to deal with on a daily basis, you gain a better understanding at times of why they do what they do.
Yeah. Well, I certainly,
And so back to this. Long story short, I get into court. I beat state court because they asked me, what you did for a living, and on my driver's license it said Class A. I was a truck driver, so they just assumed that I had a job, but I hadn't driven rig in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they denied me a public defender, so told me I made too much money.
Wow.
Well, long story short, I finally get into state court. I got no attorney, and this judge is he is tripping up there. He's like, son, do you realize you're on, $500,000 bond? These are serious charges, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, but, Your Honor, you won't let me have an attorney. And, man, anyway, long story short, it's thrown out of state court. Feds whip in, pick it straight up, transport me to Louisville to go to federal court.
Right.
I get in front of the federal magistrate. He released me on unsecured bond because the police opened fire on me and could not prove I had a weapon.
Wow. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Wow.
Somebody wants you to live,
Yeah,
Steve. Okay.
definitely.
That's all I
Exactly.
can
See,
say.
looking back, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Looking back on this, and I'm facing 40 years, no parole. I'm 35 years old, 33, right in that range, and I'm facing 40 years, no parole. That's what my first federal indictment. And that's only for 2 bank robberies. They don't know about the others.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Okay, so so for me to walk away with a final sentence of 33 months, to this day I can taste the gunmetal in my mouth because I had one gun left before they swarmed me.
Wow. Okay.
And I was ready to kill myself.
Oh.
And my oldest son flashed in front of my head. And right then, I don't know, this little kernel of parenthood is what made me toss that gun into the pond.
Wow. That's amazing.
Because I really thought my life was over at that day.
Absolutely.
3 helicopters swirling, cops coming in, screaming.
Dogs tracking you. That's
Yes, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
I thought right then it was over. Because I knew what I had done. And I knew if they caught me for half of it, it's a life sentence.
wow.
And so you see, that's where I was, but that's what caused me to shift. And you're exactly right. When I was being thrown through county jail and county jail and county jail, I remember laying under this bunk because we were in an overcrowded pod, and all I had was a piece of floor under a bunk for me to lay in. And I'm laying there thinking, what wants me alive?
Yeah.
What wants me alive? And I'm an atheist, man. I'm hardcore. I want you to know I was hardcore in the military. I never broke weak. I never cried to God.
Wow.
And I didn't cry to God in prison. I didn't cry to God for none of that. But you know what? Ayahuasca, and that's where I met the gentleman, Guadalupe Garcia. He was my cellie. Okay. And really, how I got to know him was I was looking to rob him because he was happy all the time. So when I'm watching him, I'm thinking, dude, you got some drugs somewhere. You got some pills stashed, or you got something. You got some kind
Stephen
of
Hupp. Stephen Hupp, you have to change your life.
Well, pretty much. This is what drew me. This is how the universe works.
Yeah,
it will use the worst in you to get you where it needs you to go. Okay, this is where we spent about 6 months together, me and Loopy. Okay. That's what I called him. His first name was Guadalupe. I called him Loopy.
This was your cellmate, you said?
Yeah, and I don't want you to think this is a 2-man cell. This is a 30-man pod.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Okay. So I don't want you to think we were having these candlelight conversations
No.
and, this was him converting me to shamanism or any of this. At first I was looking at him like a victim because, one, he was Peruvian, which means he wasn't hooked up with the Mexican gangs,
Right.
so he was alone. And when you're in prison and alone, you're prey. That's just what it is.
So
and
who
that's
did
where
you
I
hook
was
up
at
with?
that time.
Oh, you were
Huh?
alone? I was going to say, who were you hooked up with? You were alone?
Well, no. I wasn't hooked up with anybody. That how I learned religious law. This is the universe again, okay? I was at the library one day, and I'm sitting there reading at a table, and I'm looking over at this dude, and I'm watching his lips move as he's reading his legal paperwork. Well, I just offered to help him read. And the long story short, I started helping him with his legal paperwork, and all I did was help him with a few words and sentences that he was having trouble with and gave him my take on the comprehension. Long story short, he won his appeal. Well, he happened to be a captain in the Aryan Brotherhood.
Oh, my.
And if you research the Aryan Brotherhood, they're the most violent prison gang in the federal system.
Yeah.
And anyway, that got them. They of course they started they protected me.
Wow. Okay.
Now I'm not ganged up. If you see me on TV, I'm not tatted up. I'm not any of that.
Right.
But
Okay.
Prison's a racial environment, and you don't turn down protection like that.
Right.
But that's also how the universe was protecting me, because again, that's where I started brewing hooch. They collected my money for me. They helped me distribute it all over the prison. And
okay.
so you see all these things, that's where the Mother Aya, she works with everything.
Right.
Now then, you want to hear the flip side to that? My present day wife, Terry, you've seen Nick on the TV show.
Right.
He's mixed.
Yeah.
And I love that kid more than my own.
Right. Right.
So, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. You'd have to be in that environment 20 years ago to really understand what a special thing this was. And then I watched this gang revive an ancient Viking religion called Asatru.
Mm-hmm.
And they went from being a gang to a congregation, and they made the Bureau of Prisons build them a ceremonial ground.
Okay.
Now then, when you have found law that can push an organization with zero oversight like the Federal Bureau of Prisons,
Right.
you have really done something. And
Yeah.
that was the universe enlightening me to religious law.
Okay.
And the power of religious law.
Right.
You see, up until that point, through my atheism and my headism, whatever you want to call it, I couldn't look at religion. I was at war with religion. I was raised in a Southern Baptist area, and I mean, this stuff was hammered on me from a small child, and it never made true sense to me as I seen it presented to me through the Southern Baptist ideology.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So tell us more about.
I was at war with Christianity and religion in my mind.
Yeah.
And this was the universe and Mother Aya bringing me to a point of spirituality, even though I hadn't recognized it at all, because I was in a cauldron, a house of pain. My people had died. I had nothing when I walked out. When I walked out, I had my underwear and a few clothes in a trash bag.
Right. So tell us about your relationship with Loopy and how you got into ayahuasca.
Well, Loopy, like I said, I recognized he didn't have any drugs. And at this time, when you're looking, at that time, one of my favorite tactics, if I was going to rob you, I didn't sit there and mean mug you. I got to know you. Mm-hmm. I got to be your friend.
Right.
And anyway, when I recognized there was nothing to rob, by that time, Loopy had my interest.
Okay.
Because, he was different. He had a different energy, a different vibe, a different way of looking at things. And the more we walked the track together and chatted, I realized that, he had a whole different thing about him. And at the time, though, it wasn't like a lightning bolt come down and hit me in the head. And he just happened to mention ayahuasca to me. And before they sent him to the out processing center, because then they would send you to Texas to be deported, and that's what he was in for. He had violated his visa, overstayed it, and illegal entry.
Okay.
And anyway, long story short, he wrote me down his sister's address in Iquitos, Peru. So when I got out of prison, I had all my addresses written in a Bible, because they couldn't take my Bible because it was religious text.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, I happened to stumble on his sister's address. He had told me about ayahuasca, and he said if I mail his sister and it gets there okay, he'd try to send me some. And so out of a fluke, I mailed it. I didn't expect anything back. I didn't expect nothing. And a few months later, I get this package marked dog shampoo from Peru.
Okay.
And that's how he got it into the country to me.
Wow.
And it was a 2-liter bottle, and I walked into my garage. Now, I've done psychedelics since I was 13 years old.
Okay.
And so going and tripping on my own was nothing new. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you, after every trip from 13 on, I was still an atheist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Until ayahuasca. And the reason is something touched me back. I touched something that touched me back, and when I went back into the journey, it was waiting on me to take off right where we had left off.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I don't want you to think that this was a comfortable, pleasant experience. I spent 6 days alone in my garage, blacked out. And the first 3 days was hell. It was hell on earth for me.
And what do you mean by hell? Can you describe that? Or
what I mean is okay, you got to understand, I got no guide. I don't know anything. All right, I looked up on YouTube and I heard them talking about some cups. So like a dumbass, I go get a coffee cup.
Mm.
And,
I was going to ask you how you know.
And you know, this is how little I know. And I got no guidance. I got nobody.
Right.
And so you see, I was spirit taught. But what I mean by hell is see, when psychopaths, our amygdala is usually shrunk. And that's why they believe we don't have any, you know, our emotions are blunted, dulled, or we don't have any, depending on the scale of psychopathology that you're on. Mm-hmm. And neuroscience has found that ayahuasca opens up that little part of the brain where our emotional stores are. Okay. And I truly believe if this is not a cure for psychopathology, it can definitely make somebody much more emphatic. In other words, now I may not have the full range of emotions like a neurotypical, if you will, right, but I have much more than I've ever had in my life.
Wow. Yeah.
And at times they're overwhelming to me because, you know, it was easy to go through life not caring who you hurt. Right. It was easy to go through, yes, not feeling any remorse, not feeling any responsibility. Mm-hmm. And then to suddenly acquire these feelings and start to experience them on any level, you know, it opened up my world, and that's when I started to become more fulfilled. And then, like I said, I started working with people. Well, let me not jump too far.
Yeah, let's go back
Keep
to your
me on
garage.
Track, because I'll start taking off. Yeah. Where are we at right here?
Well, let's go back to your garage. You said it was hell, so I assume you got physically
back
ill.
Back to why it was hell.
I've watched
Okay, when
show.
ayahuasca works through you, looking back on it now, working all these times, I realized what was happening to me there. But at the time, I did not know. When ayahuasca is working through you, it's breaking apart neural pathways that are solidified in aberrations. And this is where nobody's going to be able to explain how the medicine works completely until it's probably thoroughly studied. And I don't even think you'll explain it then, because it's as much as a molecular portal to the other side as it is anything. And that hell I went through was Mother had to show me all the pain I'd caused. And behind that pain and that hell came self-forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. That's
you
huge.
know, I had to come to the point that I couldn't change what I'd done, but I could change who I'd made.
Right.
And that was one of the biggest turning points for me with my first experiences with Mother Aya. And she is a real entity there without a doubt. And she is not an entity that you have to worship. She requires no worship. If you Googled Mesopotamia and you looked her up, she goes all the way back to the beginning of man.
Wow. Right. So then, go ahead.
So anyway, we're still in the garage. First 3 days is hell. I blocked the door. I told my wife, my present wife, Terry, bless her heart, no matter what you hear, do not open this door. Because, you know, I didn't know what I was going to go through or happen. And I didn't want anybody in there with me. And long story short, went through my own personal hell, went through everything I'd ever done since I was a child. And then I also went back to our birth. Mother took me back to my birth to help me understand my addictive mindset. Back in 1965, I'd like you to imagine how I was born. You know, back then I probably had a doctor with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth in Louisville, Kentucky. My mother was probably smoking while in delivery.
Yeah. Well,
okay. I mean, that's a picture of how it used. You know what I mean? How it
And we don't even give it a thought now. You know, do you ever think, okay, and then think about back then when I came out, they held me upside down and slapped me.
Oh, right. Ooh.
And then they threw me in a plastic cart and wheeled me away from my mother.
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever wonder why so many serial killers come from my era?
Yeah, you know, that's the time you bond, and, you know.
That's oxytocin. That's when oxytocin, that is the hormone that we call love. Mm-hmm. That is the bonding hormone. Mm-hmm. And it is also done through trauma, because who's our first traumatizer? Our mother.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The first time she slapped our hand and said no, we were traumatized. We realized this person could hurt us. And we don't even give it a thought. But anyway, back to the garage. Now then, I had to go through, she took me back to my birth, showed me why I had developed this pattern of thinking, pattern of behavior, and why it was only me that could change it. Mm-hmm. Now then, it's easy for me to sit here and say the words, but there's no way I can convey to you the impressions that were made upon me through this experience.
Right.
That is one of the hardest parts of the work that we do, is trying to explain something that words can't describe. Well, and then here's the strange part, okay? The medicine is an energy of its own, because I remember pouring that cup and I remember flashing in my head, how well do you know this dude? Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, and that's your ego. You know, looking back on it now that I'm experienced, that's, your ego is scared of this process, because transformation is about to come, and transformation is always painful.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is.
That's such a good point that you make. It definitely is.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's where I kind of always keep a Buddhist saying in my mind: pain times resistance equals suffering. When you're resisting the pain of life, you're guaranteed to suffer. Mm-hmm. When you accept the pain that goes with life, you're guaranteed to progress. Wow. Because pain is the only thing I can promise you from the moment you're born. I can't promise you you'll be loved, respected, any of those things that we value. Mm-hmm. But I can promise you will hurt. What you do with that pain will determine your life.
Yeah, that's so true. That's pretty profound. So how many times did you take ayahuasca in your garage that week?
I took it all 6 days.
Oh, my. Okay.
I drank the whole bottle, because once I got going, I could not believe what I was experiencing. Once I worked through my personal hells and all the above, I could not believe the bliss I was experiencing. You know, yes, I mean, we have a saying in our church, and that is, we call her mother for a reason. When she caresses you, nothing's more blissful. But when she pimp slaps you, nothing's more painful. Yeah. And she is quick to do either or. She will not let you sit there and believe your own bullshit.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, and I mean, that's what I find with addicts. You know, she taught me the difference, and I know you've heard this in other arenas, but for me, she taught it to me, was, you know, the difference of guilt and shame. Guilt, you did something wrong. Shame, you are wrong.
Oh, that's so wrong, right?
You know, and
to say
and we've
wrong.
Never been taught the, you know, and another thing, you know, she showed me, you know, I'd never been taught coping skills, and I'd never learned coping skills. And also another thing she taught me in those 6 days, but it took me a year or two to wrap my mind around this, was that vulnerability was why I was reacting over aggressively to everything, because I hadn't found balance in being vulnerable. Yeah. You know, and that, you know, from an ego point of view, I was struggling with that so hard. Definitely. You know, the only thing I could equate it to is when in prison I had to take an AA class, and they made me stand in front of a group of people and go, "Hey, my name is Steve Hupp, and I'm an addict."
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
And, you know, I mean, it was like I struggled with that, and that's what I had to find my balance in, is like, you were wrong, dude. You were wrong. Absolutely. And you've been wrong for 35 years. Yeah. And everybody who taught you were wrong too. And that's where Mother showed me another little insight, man, that I use often. And that is, the people who taught us to parent knew less than we did. Mm-hmm. And the people who taught them knew less than they did.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And I didn't recognize this, fully until, I met Terry and had a blended family. And, my first 3 kids, I used corporal punishment a lot. And her kids, I've never touched them, and they did better in school and everything. I mean, it was just a difference of uneducation. Okay, 6 days of ayahuasca, probably 6 months after that, I'm kind of walking around shaking my head, because vibrations has changed, energy has changed. I'm starting to notice what I'm trying to write off as coincidences are manifestations out of my brain.
Yeah.
I'm starting to affect my reality mentally.
Wow.
And I mean, it's scaring me. Because I'm sitting here starting to one question, am I going insane? Am I believing that, my own bullshit again?
Right. So this was your transformation?
Yes, this is all part of the transformation. This is all part of learning to trust the universe, to trust flow, to trust the unseen, the things that no one can prove, but yet you can see the impact it's having in the physical reality around you. And think about Terry, okay? Think about Terry. She met me when I come out of prison, and I could go on for hours of what I was like when I first walked out of federal prison. I was 235 pounds. I'd lived on the handball court in the weight pile. I had a glare that could melt ice. Terry was my first boss, and she voted not to hire me. Does that tell you anything about the energy I had? Huh?
That's how you met? She was your boss?
Yes.
Oh,
It's Steak and Shake. That was the only job I could get coming out of prison. Imagine going around in February in cold Kentucky, and you got no car, you're on foot in Louisville, Kentucky, and every place you go to apply for a job, you got to tell them you're a convicted bank robber or a domestic terrorist. Remember, I was in during 911. 911 happened while I was in prison. And after 911, they declared everybody like me to be a domestic terrorist, and my DNA is on 3 federal data banks.
So Terry decided not to hire you?
Terry voted, they had a round table, and Terry voted, she didn't want me on her shift. She didn't like my energy. She didn't like my vibe. We've been together now 16 years, but that tells you, kind of where I'm at, where we were at when I come out of prison. But again, this was a humbling experience because, I had to work a drive-through. I'd never worked anything like that. To me, this was the worst thing that could have happened to me. But looking back, that was exactly where Mother needed me because I was learning how to cook. I was forced to take a very subordinate role, and I had to humble myself.
Right. So tell us how you became a shaman.
Okay. As far as becoming a shaman, I mean, when I look back on my path, to me, I began the path in prison. And when I was robbing banks, I can look back and, man, it probably began at birth if I wanted to be truthful to myself. And I've denied it, and I resisted it, and I did everything because I couldn't believe in it. But I didn't even know what it was. To me, I was just weird. When I recognized everybody wasn't like me, then to me, I felt like I was just weird. And,
well, I think a lot of people feel like that. A lot of people feel like outcasts, especially, teenagers. You don't fit in. You're not like that girl. You don't look like her. I think that's very common.
And TV programs us to what we should be, and that's the illusion. And they call it programming for a reason. But back then, we didn't know it. To this, Walter Cronkite was God. This was a different time. And so, anyway, back when I was a kid, like I said, through this all, my dad, he wasn't a very religious man, but, he always healed animals. People would bring stuff to him that was sick. And so, this goes back through lines and all the above. But back to when I really realized what I was becoming, it was probably, I would say, easily 7 years in. Because I was fascinated by this substance, and I could not believe what it had done for me. And so I started seeking out other hardcore addicts. Now, this is going to sound cold and cruel, but I tried to find the worst of the worst, so if I killed them, no one would care. And I would only work in motel rooms and campgrounds, and I worked underground, one person at a time for quite a while, learning the medicine, learning different aberrations. I've had people try to kill me. I've had to chain people for 26 hours because they were paranoid schizophrenic and they got lost in their psychosis in their journey and decided I was the devil. And so, so you see, it's not all, milk and honey. Plus, you learned, that the one thing I learned the most was we don't all fit categories. We're all individuals, and we all have individual body chemistry, individual experiences, and individual thresholds. And so, you must, as I'm setting up Shaman School, which is what I'm doing right now, the worst first thing anybody coming into this line of work, if I had to say you got to have one thing and one thing before all else, and that is power of observation. Well, what I mean by that is you must be first of all, everybody coming to you is wanting healed, okay? And the reality of it is, even if they ain't trying to lie to you, they're lying to you. Because they're not going to tell you about, I take Prozac, because they don't want to hear you got to wait 60 days. And does anybody think that all the addicts that flew to Peru, none of them were eating their scripts on the flight? Because if you believe that, you don't know addicts. We are the best liars in the world. Because we have to be. And that is the reality of it. That's what the addiction does. Because the brain is but back to what we were talking about. Yes, I observed many people from many different stations of life, and I found that you just had to put all that aside and see what was standing in front of you when they walked in. And start there. I just got done I can't tell you too much about this person because of confidentiality, but I just got done working with a psychiatrist who works with the VA with addictions. And me and him were talking, and, most of them coming in with the doctorates. I call them the alphabet people, A, B, C, PhD. Well, anyway, we're sitting there talking, and he's like, well, I've healed a lot of people. And I said, well, I bet you have, but how many have you healed in 2 days? Tell me how many you did there. And of course, he ain't got an answer. And now, mind you, the more I peel this guy's onion, he's in psychotherapy. So here's a doctor of psychotherapy who's been in psychotherapy for 14 years.
Oh, wow, that's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know what I mean? So, I'm kind of looking at you like, well, I kind of view it, I can't help anybody till I'm whole. Because otherwise I'm not authentic. So if you're not whole, how can you feel responsible for these healings? Because even me, I've learned through these processes of working with all these people, I'm not the healer. I'm just a part of the process of healing. The real healer is the person in front of you. Because without their trust, without their faith in what you're doing, and without them working with you, you can pour all the ayahuasca you want it down their throat, and it will mean nothing in 2 weeks.
Definitely. Yeah. So then, so you were practicing underground and doing one person at a time. So then what happened? Is that...
Okay. We practice underground. I mean, I'm watching, and you have to understand, I've acted on my own behalf in court many times, so I'm very well versed with the legal system. So I'm watching court cases, Mother, the spirits are nudging me and all the above, but man, interpreting where they want me to go is incredibly difficult sometimes, especially back then, because I wasn't very attuned to the vibrations, the impressions, and everything in between. I'm more in tune now, but there's still gaps. Long story short, though, I started watching this case with the UDV, the União Digital, which is a church out of Brazil, and they were located in New Mexico, and the DEA was on their ass. And I watched this case for 5 years as I'm working underground, and I'm watching it go through the courts, and I'm pulling the case. I'm pulling it with the Freedom of Information Act. Long story short, they won their case at the Supreme Court level that they could use ayahuasca as a sacrament. Now you have to understand, ayahuasca is just a word. We use so many words in our country that we have no idea the meanings of. You know, we all talk about ayahuasca like we think we know what we're talking about, but it's like the word beer. I can invite you over for a beer and you don't even know if you're drinking alcohol. You have no idea which country, where it was brewed, or anything. But in your mind, you got a concept over a word that is meaningless. Because ayahuasca is a word that describes actually not one brew. Because every shaman is a microbrewery, and we all brew it differently.
Oh, interesting.
That's a very interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
I like that.
And when I started doing my own research and put down YouTube and put down what Latin America was selling me, I found ayahuasca all over the world in different names, in different blends, all the way to Egypt, all the way to Mesopotamia, before Latin America was even a continent. And then I found the first shaman to be in Siberia. And this is a fact through cave art. And did you know where you got the story of Santa Claus? Back in Siberia, they use the asante mushroom, which is the red one with the white dots, which is toxic to humans. But they learned if they watched the reindeer eat the mushroom, they could drink the reindeer pee. And that's where you got the myth of the flying reindeer.
What?
Oh,
Reindeers
Lord.
don't fly? Steve, what the heck?
Because what
Wow.
happens is the mushroom goes through the reindeer's livers and kidneys. Look it up. Google it. Don't take my word for it. But anyway, so I found shamans all over the world. And then, I did 6 months whole time in prison. Long story short, I read the Bible front to back 6 times. And, the more I started looking at this story, and now after I used ayahuasca, everything started making sense. I seen where Jesus, if you will, he didn't do a single miracle till he fasted 60 days in the desert. But yet, I was born and raised in Southern Baptist Christianity, and I didn't see none of them going past lunch. And I've never, and through it all, so I started looking at what was many other things we weren't told.
Yes. Very
Because
true.
so few of us took the time to read this hard-to-read book and many other books like it. And that's another thing Mother enlightened me to, that even religion has its place.
Yes.
No matter what you think of it. Mm-hmm. And here's the hardcore fact. Everything we have in our world didn't come from love. It came from war.
Mm-hmm. Dividing
and
lines.
And religion is the seed of all wars.
Right. Right.
See, that's how the universe works. It doesn't care right or wrong. It will help Hitler the same as it will help Gandhi.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's proved it over and over and over. So it's about what you believe.
Right. So then you had to,
So you were
what?
researching-
File
Right.
File
okay.
court
Back
documents.
to this. I'm watching this UDV church. Forgive me. I will get distracted. My story's complex.
Well, you're fascinating,
Yeah, we
so
love it.
we just go with it.
Okay. Well, the UDV church, I'm watching it. It goes to the Supreme Court, and that's when I recognize that the Supreme Court has just opened up the whole door, but it only applies to the federal government. A year later, Kentucky, gay marriage goes into effect, or a few years later, not just a year, a couple years later. Gay marriage, the Supreme Court rules gay marriage is cool. Everybody here in Kentucky panics. They invoke a Religious Freedom Act because they're scared these Southern Baptist ministers will be forced to marry gay couples. Mm-hmm. And when they did, in their haste, all they did was cut and paste the federal government's Religious Freedom Act. Mm-hmm. And when they did that, that opened the door for us in ayahuasca.
Wow.
Because until that moment, the federal government's ruling only applied to the federal government, not the states.
Okay, there you go.
So then, yeah. So then...
And that's when I started my church in my little trailer park, because I figured that no one would listen to anybody in a trailer park if they were bitching.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we stayed there for 5 years.
And then you just
And
grew
then, you know,
and grew gradually?
and yeah, we just kept growing and growing. You know, I mean, it just and we let the community get used to us.
Absolutely. Kind of ease them into it.
Exactly. You know, we're also, you know, making a lot of small political moves in our community. We're making sure that everybody understands we're not trying to take anything from anybody.
Definitely.
We're not trying to steal your congregation. We're not trying to take your tax dollars. I'm not trying to build a cult. I want people to go home. Because then you're going to infect your community. You're going to infect your people with this unconditional love that the universe is more than willing to share with us all.
Okay. Yeah. So then you went from a trailer park, you know, we saw your show.
Went from a trailer park TV show, all of a sudden I'm sitting there eating dinner, and 7:30 at night, man, and I get this phone call, and it's just somebody on the other end telling me they're a producer out in Los Angeles, that I'd healed somebody's child, and anyway, word got around, and the next thing you know, they want us to be a 15-minute spot in a 30-minute documentary.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what I originally agreed to. Well, I screen tested, my wife screen tested, we did all that fun stuff on Skype, and the long story short, boom, they came back with a new contract. We want you to be the whole 30-minute one-time show.
Wow.
I agreed. I agreed to it. Said, okay, I can do that. Boom, we do the 30-minute one-time documentary. Vice goes back and views it, and they come back, dude, we want 10 episodes, 30 minutes long each.
Nice.
That is
Well, that's
so
a success
awesome.
story most
Well, get
people
this.
dream of,
We
actors,
go
actresses.
through all the headaches and the gymnastics. We shoot a pilot, da-da-da-da-da. They see the pilot. Now they want an hour every episode.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
So in 12 weeks, we shot the equivalent of 3 motion pictures
Oh my god.
of live footage.
Mhm.
Wow.
And it was crazy. No one had ever done anything like that, because we were doing ceremonies back to back to back for 12 weeks. And imagine doing a ceremony, and then remind you too that I want Viceland to know that this is real, that this is no hustle on my part. So I let them pick the people in the ceremonies. All I did was medically clear them. Me and Terry, more Terry than me at that point. And we medically cleared anybody who applied, and then we just shipped them to Vice and let them pick. So needless to say, they're picking us some really hardcore cases.
Yes.
And I want Vice to know that this is real. I want the world to know this is real. Nothing here is set up. So we go with that premise, you know, that you're going to pick the people. I don't care who you pick. And then, but I got one stipulation: you got to film them weeks after the event.
Right.
Oh, that's
Follow up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where people were able to see these people progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was beyond any doubt. But man, I was in a car wreck right before we started production. I had 12 broken bones.
Oh my gosh.
And I set them myself, because if I went to the hospital, the insurance wouldn't have covered me to do the show.
Oh, I see. Wow. Okay.
So when you see me on that show and I'm looking that rough, that's why.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You have 12 broken bones. Oh my gosh.
God.
Okay. All right, Steve. So it sounds like you were born to be a healer. You know? Your father healed animals.
It's the most fulfilling path I've ever found in my life.
Yeah. Definitely. So I love your show, by the way, Kentucky Ayahuasca.
Thank you.
And that's what, piqued my curiosity. And I was so inspired by your show to see how you are treating addicts with ayahuasca. And,
yes.
That's why I contacted you, and I was excited to see that there's another
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I found in addiction, whether it's heroin, meth, pills, whatever it is is that many of us, myself included, we delude ourselves that we got the worst addiction that can't be cured, and that's our addiction feeding the addiction. And what I find that ayahuasca helps the most with, in a neuroscience kind of way, is it repropagates your serotonin and dopamine receptors that get burned out through drug abuse. Because every drug, anything in the world that you call pleasure, all it's doing is releasing dopamine within your brain. Dopamine is chemical pleasure. And that's what gets the addict. That's why, they'll quit, but that's why they relapse, because their dopamine and serotonin receptors are burned out. Same way with people on antidepressants over long term. That's why you'll never hear anybody on TV going, I took Prozac for 5 years and it healed me of depression. No, you'll never see that. What you'll see is they'll be on Prozac the rest of their life. Their life will taste like dirt because over the length of time, Prozac has burned out their serotonin receptors just like meth and just like heroin does. And so what happens with the addict is they go through the dope sick, they go through the struggle, they go through the mental gymnastics of quitting, and then bam, nothing, everything sucks. Because you can't get that big dopamine rush without that needle or without that pill or without that line. And for me, without that bank robbery. And so, that's the creature we got to build back. And it takes time. But ayahuasca is like throwing gasoline to a candle. It's like going in there and putting the best dopamine receptor fertilizer on your brain. In fact, the afterglow of ayahuasca, which goes on for a day or two at times after ceremonies, it's like little fingers massaging your brain. And really what's happening is your brain is being healed from the inside out. Aberrations are being reworked around. But here's the thing, I don't want to give anybody out there the wrong impression. Ayahuasca is not a miracle. It is a powerful tool. But the real tool that you also must invoke with ayahuasca is the power of your inner dialogue. And that is the real key that will propel you into sobriety if that's your goal. If whatever you're looking to change is that inner dialogue. That's what I had to change. That's what Mother showed me beyond any doubt. That, dude, would you let someone else talk to you like you talk to yourself? And I don't think many of us would. Okay, in Taoism, they say it in a different way. They say it, the wind from a butterfly wings will cause a hurricane on the other side of the world. And that's where a lot of addicts, they come in with so much shame. And rightfully so, because I've heard what they've gotten away with in them cages. And I'm going to tell you, while heroin's a bad thing, opiates can be misused, but you don't want to see the world without opiates. I don't think you'd want to watch one surgery without anesthesia. Okay, so nothing is all the way bad. It's all in how we use it. And so, and that's where we got to remind ourselves also is the biggest thing I see overlooked in our country in the world of addiction is meth. For heroin addicts, we got some help out there. We got some Suboxone. We got some Narcan. I'm not saying it always works, but we're working on getting something. But meth heads, we got nothing for. And let me tell you, some of the worst atrocities known to people have been done on people on meth. All of World War II was fought on meth. Research it. It's called Prevatin. When we work with addicts, we have to work with them to manage their expectations of the journey, because most opiate addicts, whether it's heroin pills or whatever it is, their sensors are dulled. Okay, so they may not get the big visions, especially their first time or two out. They may not threshold, but usually most of them have done a lot of damage to their bodies through lack of sleep, lack of nutrition. And when ayahuasca is working, it would be like if I gave you a shot of morphine and you had a broke leg. your pain would just go away, but you really wouldn't feel the morphine. But if you didn't have a broke leg and I gave you that shot of morphine, you're going to have a fine head on your shoulders. And ayahuasca works very similar. So if you got an alcoholic or an opiate addict or a meth user who's coming in that, they haven't slept in a year other than nodding out or passed out, they haven't ate well. Well, the medicine's got a lot of work to do on them physically. A lot of them come in here, they'll watch YouTube on home, and they'll think, man, I'm going to drink this cup, sit on God's lap. He or she is going to validate everything I did right, and they're going to forgive me for everything I did wrong, and it's all going to be good, and I won't have to do a thing. And that's the illusion that exactly made them an addict. And so those are what that's what we do right off the rip. We're managing their expectations. We're telling them, look, we got a lot of physical healing to do now, and you got to trust the medicine and allow the medicine to go wherever it wants to go. I've never had anybody accurately explain to me how an aspirin knows you got a toothache, a toe ache, or a headache. But it finds it, and you learn to trust it.
What is the process to come and stay with you and go through this ceremony?
Okay, the first step for anybody is to go to our website, ayaquest.com, and fill out the application as truthfully and honestly as you can. We're not doing it to pry into your past life. We're doing it for your safety. There's lots of variables with the medicine, and we have to take as much information from you into account. After that, your application, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait to be approved. And yes, we've got right now probably 800 applicants that we're now looking at. But the good news is I'm putting on staff and I'm training people right now to screen the applications. Remember, we're in an arena. We're in uncharted waters. No one has ever done anything like this in America. And so it ain't like I got a guide I can go through. It's all, you got to feel your way through one step at a time. And during it all, thank goodness, we have never harmed a single soul. We have a strong success rate, but does it ever not work? Absolutely. Every now and then you'll get somebody who comes in, they don't want to listen to a thing you got to tell them. To them, they know it all. And because they've been to a rock concert and done some acid a few times, they think they understand psychedelics. But psychedelics, again, is a word that describes actually nothing. I could invite you over for opiate, to have an opiate, and you don't know if you're going to do carfentanil or if you're going to do codeine. And so people come in, they think, oh, I got this. And then what happens is they don't listen to you. And they don't follow your guidance. And so, yeah, you will have a percentage. Nothing's 100%. And I'm not selling this as 100%. But I can tell you this. I would put my bottom dollar on 80%. And I will put my bottom dollar that's probably 1,000 times better than modern drug treatment. But let me tell you, it's the 3 weeks after this that the whole process is going to unfold for you. That's when the little pieces are going to fall into place. And if you will set your inner dialogue to be open, don't do anything for them first 2 weeks, you will be amazed at what you become aware of. You will be amazed at how your vibration and energy is raised, and you will be amazed at how your relationships will become deeper and more meaningful, and life just becomes better. And the reality of it is the world did not change. Your perspective on the world changed.
Yeah, that is incredible. So, Steve, let me ask you, if somebody says, comes to you, a heroin addict comes to you July 30th of 2019, okay, and, they maybe didn't get the full journey, or they feel like they have more work to do with the journey, mm-hmm, how soon can they come back, or can they? I mean,
yes, they can come back. They can come back, as many times as they feel they need to.
Okay.
What I usually go by as a guide is, and this is more of an ethical standard I have set, and that is I try not to have contact with them for the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks after.
Okay.
And the reason is because I know how open subconsciously they are.
Right.
And I'm trying desperately not to trauma bond them to me.
Right. I get it.
And not to allow transference to start taking place. You know, and because what terrifies me about ayahuasca is, could you imagine what would happen if one Jim Jones slid through?
You know, I, as just being a member of the general public, appreciate that. You know, that it's not about money. It's about, you know, healing whatever is harming, you know, causing you to behave you know, in a bad way or in a way that harms yourself.
When I first started, I've seen that, you know, unless you could afford to take 30 days off and afford a plane ticket to Peru, round trip, and could afford all these things, it was totally inaccessible to the common people. And that's why when we designed our program, we tried to design it where they could come in for 2 days, not have to take even a week off of work, and get them back into their life as quick as can so they can start applying.
So can somebody without addiction or trauma or abuse, like a quote normal person or a balanced person, you know, somebody not struggling with anything like that, can they benefit from ayahuasca?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You know, we're all about progression. And I mean, every human being on the planet, we all want the same thing. We want to know that, you know, that our children's going to have a decent life. We want to know that we have a future. And we also want to know what's on the other side of the threshold. Because I think every human being, even when I was deep into my atheism, there was still that kernel of doubt. And I couldn't get around it. And I believe all of us know that we're much more than we are here. And I believe we come here to hone our souls and to actuate that God spark, if you will. Because, you know, when I look out at the universe, I first had to ask myself about this word that we're throwing around so casually. What is the universe? It's not the points of light. It's the darkness in between. And that's why we got to become balance in all things, including darkness, because darkness is not just the absence of light. Otherwise, a black hole would not exist. And here's another conundrum in this life that I found. No matter how fast the light travels, the darkness is always there first.
Isn't that true? It is. You have to work through the darkness to get, you know, to the light.
And that was my 3 days of hell. Now, does everybody have to go through that? Not everybody's darkness was as deep as mine. You know, but I couldn't be here if I took one thread out of the rope that is Steve today. I couldn't be here if I took anything away.
You know, I just think we're all put on this earth for a purpose. I believe in God, and, you know, I believe that from the day we're born, our path is set out for us. So, you know, this awful thing that happened to my son, I lost him to heroin addiction, you know, but through that, now we're coming out into the lightness on the other side. And, you know, our focus now is helping other people who are struggling like he did, you know. And I'm not always just talking rehab and, you know, Suboxone and all that stuff. We want to see that there's other options available. And, you know, everyone can make their own choice, and everybody has things that are better for them, would work better for them. But you know what? We need to come up with more options. We have this horrible epidemic that's happening here. And, you know, we need to reclaim our children. That's my motivation.
Oh, and I agree. And this epidemic that is happening here was very well constructed. And, you know, when you're seeing a pharmacy in a town of 10,000 write 200,000 scripts with a DEA number, and no one raises an eyebrow, everybody's in the game. And we got to shut that game down. And, you know, I read about Jeremy on your website, and, you know, and I looked at the pictures. He looked like a phenomenal young man. And I've seen so many phenomenal young people get caught up in that world. And, I mean, the person that dies ain't the person that they were. That was the person that the addiction created.
Right. Well, that's the saddest part, is it robs their soul. It takes who they are,
And that's where I feel we really got to come back to a holistic approach to healing this phenomenon. And that's also where I want to reach out to the drug treatment community. I know I just said some ugly things earlier about you, but man, we can work together, because I don't have all the answers either, and you have some answers that maybe I don't. And I'm not at war with anybody. This is the best way, or this isn't the worst way. It's let's make a better way together.
And that's what we're about also. We believe in that 100%. No path is right for everybody. Everybody has their own path and their own journey, So
exactly, and I guarantee it, when my mom and dad was looking at me going through all that, they never could have seen me where I was sitting now. And so, I want to say to everybody hearing this, no matter how bleak you think things are, it is darkest just before dawn.
Well, thank you for your time, Steve. You're so enlightening, and I know you're super busy, so thanks for spending time with us. And in closing, tell us again how people can find out about AyaQuest.
Okay, you can go to our website, www.ayaquest.com, and there you'll find all the information. I suggest you go to our frequently asked questions page, because we try to cover every question there. And then the first step is to do your application and get it in, and wait for your email on acceptance or needing further information.
Right. No, it's super comprehensive. I love your website.
Well, thank you.
So anyway, thank you again for your time, and we wish you all the best.
And same here, and thank you all for inviting us. We really enjoyed your show, and I look forward to working with you all in the future. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. You too.
You just heard the podcast $20, produced by Rose and Rebecca Castro and Berta DeQuay, recorded at the New Media Agency Studios in Los Angeles.